From the largest and most mysterious primates that ever walked the earth to the buried remains of ancient giants in the middle of California, find out if giants really did exist. The Gigantopithecus. There are a lot of clues that say giants could have existed on Earth many years ago. Take the Gigantopithecus, for example. This was the largest primate that ever walked around on our planet, but it actually went extinct because it was too enormous. This has led some people to speculate that giant humans could have also gone extinct for the same reason. According to Live Science, we don't actually know all that much about the Gigantopithecus, other than that it weighed around 600 pounds, stood 10 feet tall, and went extinct because they had a limited diet and couldn't get enough food. We also know that these ancient primal giants are a very distant relative of orangutans. While this is not definitive proof that giants once walked the world, it also kind of is. You see, this enormous primate lived exclusively in the forest until its habitat began to shrink around 100,000 years ago. As a result, it no longer was able to find enough food to survive and reproduce, and it eventually went extinct. The first time the Gigantopithecus became known was in 1935 when a German paleontologist found its molars in a pharmacy in China where they were being labeled and sold as dragon teeth. Because as we all know, dragon teeth are the only way to fix your personal health problems. But anyway, thanks to the teeth, scientists have learned a lot about the ancient giant primate. But there have actually been no skulls or skeletons found of the Gigantopithecus, only teeth and pieces of jawbones, which means other giant man-beasts could have roamed the earth, we just have not found their bones. Roman giant. Just recently in Rome, a new giant was found. Even by today's standards, considering we are quite a bit taller than our ancient ancestors, 6 feet 8 inches tall is a pretty incredible feat. Even some of the tallest basketball players are not that tall. And in Rome during the 3rd century AD, average men only reached about 5'6", which makes average men today look basically like giants. The fact that a skeleton has been found from Roman times with a striking height of 6 feet 8 inches is simply incredible. According to a report from the Daily Mail, archaeologists believe that they have discovered the first complete skeleton of an ancient person who had gigantism. This happened near the city of Rome while excavating a necropolis. Gigantism is very rare. It's rare these days, only affecting about 3 out of every million people. To find a skeleton with gigantism from ancient times is basically unheard of. There have been 2 partial skeletons discovered throughout the years that could have had gigantism, one in Egypt and one in Poland. However, scientists believe the skeleton they found in Rome is a definitive case of gigantism and cannot be anything else. But who's to say gigantism isn't just a lost trait passed down from our ancient giant ancestors? As you may know, gigantism is a condition that leads to excessive growth way beyond the human average. This happens because of an overproduction of growth hormones in childhood. Just think about that for a second. If it's possible for human beings to produce so many growth hormones and grow to be giants, who's to say we weren't giants before? The giants of Death Valley. According to ancient legends, Death Valley in California is actually concealing an ancient subterranean city of giants. Most of us are probably familiar with Death Valley. It is the most inhospitable place on Earth with an average temperature of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. There's basically no water, vegetation is not in abundance, and the whole area is dangerously below sea level. But if the Native American legends are to be believed, there is an underground kingdom located underneath the desert sands. Even though the area around Death Valley truly is horrendous, it has not stopped Native Americans from living there for centuries, long before the white man showed up. And they actually have legends that say Death Valley is a land of ghosts, and that inside the subterranean city is a portal to the underworld. They have all kinds of legends about Death Valley, but most archaeologists won't even go to check the place out. It's simply never been dug up before. There are some strange tales of prospectors and miners from the early 20th century stumbling upon underground passages and finding the mummies of giants and huge statues, but none of it has ever been substantiated. There could be proof of life and giants under the cracked salt plains of Death Valley, but also there might be nothing. Ethiopian giants. Archaeologists in Ethiopia uncovered an ancient city just recently in 2017. In a report from the BBC, archaeologists claim that they have discovered a city in eastern Ethiopia filled with artifacts from Egypt, India, and China. The city's name is Harla, and the artifacts found are proof that the old Abyssinian Empire was indeed a serious center for trade in the ancient world all the way into the 10th century. But forget about what the archaeologists found for just a minute. There is actually a local myth that says that the area was once occupied by giants. The locals claim that because the settlement buildings were constructed with stone blocks that were so large and so heavy that no ordinary people could have lifted them, it was undoubtedly giants who had occupied the place. And even though the stuffy scientists have disproved the local myth of giants, claiming it to be impossible, the local people still believe it. And why not? The oldest hominin fossil ever discovered was just north of this region. The Queen of Sheba lived close by. The Ark of the Covenant is still sitting in a compound just up the street in Axum. Why couldn't there have been giants living in Ethiopia thousands of years ago? Robert Wadlow. If we're going to be talking about giants, Robert Wadlow must be added to the list. You probably recognize Robert as the tallest man in medical history. He is the irrefutable giant that lived. He was actually born at 6:30 in the morning in Illinois on the 22nd of February 1918. When he was last measured on June 27, 1940, Robert was 8 feet 11 inches tall. He was literally 1 inch away from being 9 feet. That's a pretty good size for a giant if you ask me. Is this proof of giants existing? Well, maybe not and maybe yes. The simple fact that a human man can grow to be about 9 feet tall says a lot about our DNA and our own potential. Of course, Robert actually had a pretty difficult life. He died in a hotel room as a result of a septic blister on his right ankle. He weighed just about 440 pounds at the time of his death, and according to Guinness World Records, Robert ate about 8,000 calories per day. That's over 3 times the recommended serving for an average adult. Being around 3 feet taller than everyone else around you could not have been a lot of fun. Imagine how many "how's the weather up there" jokes you would have to put up with. Since Robert, there has not been another person born who even comes close to breaking his record. He is certainly an anomaly, but this is definitive proof that giants can exist and have existed. Perhaps not in large numbers, but they have definitely walked across the planet. Giant footprints. Speaking of walking across the planet, there is supposedly a giant footprint in the Pingyan village of Guizhou province in China. It was allegedly discovered in 2016, and taking a good look at it, the photos you can see, it's definitely the footprint of a very large human. By local reports, the footprint found pressed into the stone was around 22 inches long. That is significantly longer than any normal person's foot. The only issue with this story is that there is not a whole lot of authentication. Sure, there are some photos of a giant footprint, and there were some vague reports that the footprint was dated back to the prehistoric era, but unfortunately, this just cannot be verified. There is no reputable source, and there are no reputable pictures. And this brings us to the second giant footprint you may have seen online. This one was found somewhere in Africa and is claimed to be 200 million years old. The footprint is also roughly the size of a human man, but the weird thing about this one is that it's the wrong side up. The giant would have had to kick the footprint sideways into the stone. Then nobody found it for thousands and thousands of years. Unfortunately, these giant footprints aren't much evidence of anything except conspiracy theories. The Nephilim. Most of you out there have probably heard of the Nephilim. They were a strange group of giant people, also sometimes known as the sons of God and the daughters of men, who supposedly lived before the Great Flood. They are supposed to be the result of the fallen sons of God reproducing with the daughters of Adam. The Nephilim are referred to in several religious texts, including Genesis and Ezekiel. In Hebrew, the word Nephilim is sometimes translated directly as giants, but despite the Nephilim appearing in so many religious texts, many scholars are unsure the exact nature of the supposed giants and whether or not they were indeed real. The issue with religious texts is that everything is up for interpretation, and trying to pinpoint the accuracy of a legend after several thousand years is a disastrous game of phone tag. Some believe the great size of the Nephilim was metaphorical, and other people take it more literally. But the main point is that the Bible spoke of giants living on Earth. Now, is that proof? Well, that's for you to decide. The Lost City of Giants. Just a few years ago, there was an incredible discovery made deep in the Ecuadorian jungle. Researchers discovered the remains of a massive structure that is now being called the Lost City of Giants. This enormous place was found in a region where local legends claim a race of giant humans once lived. It's pretty incredible, as the old structure that was found has 260-foot walls and doorways that suggest the existence of extremely tall people. There were allegedly also giant tools found in the vicinity that looked way too big to be used by normal people. A researcher based in Ecuador actually believes that the structure belonged to an unknown culture that lived in the area before the Inca. This could very well have been a city, or at least a place of worship dominated by giants of the jungle. However, because of its precarious location very far from the nearest town through dense and mountainous jungle, almost nobody is willing to explore it. And for this reason, there has not been enough research done since the recent discovery. It's one of those mysteries that is still up in the air, and we might not know the truth of the Lost City of Giants until a legitimate team of researchers gets down there and starts digging around. The giants of the Amazon. Here is another story shrouded in mystery, also from Ecuador. As reported in Archaeology World, a British research team uncovered extremely tall skeletons in the Amazon region of both Ecuador and Peru. Roughly half a dozen human skeletons were found from the early 1400s that were between 7 feet and 8 feet in height. This would make them very close to being real-life giants. According to one of the researchers, they are still looking into the exact origins of the skeletons and didn't want to make any claims based on speculation. Because the skeletons are so enormous, they could have some serious implications on life in the jungle hundreds and hundreds of years ago. As you can imagine, this is a pretty controversial area of research. No modern scientist wants to admit that giants could have been living in the jungle 600 years ago. And in this case, we might just have to wait a little longer for research to be completed. But what is a little startling about these skeletons is that their joints all appeared completely healthy. Researchers also claimed that one of the skeletons they found was a female who was about 60 years old when she died. This would make her much older than most people who have a case of gigantism, which suggests these ancient 8-foot-tall peoples didn't have a disease at all and were just naturally giant. The Kentucky Dover Mound. Last on the list for today is the Kentucky Dover Mound. It all started in the 1800s when reports began to come in that a discovery had been made of extremely large skeletons all buried under mounds of dirt in North America. The skeletons were supposedly between 7 and 8 feet tall, very much like the skeletons discovered recently in Ecuador. There were even a few skeletons discovered that were between 9 and 11 feet, having extremely large skulls and enormous lower jawbones. These skeletons are believed to have belonged to the Adena people, who could have been an extremely rare and unique form of human living in West Virginia. Apparently, some of the skeletons found in the Kentucky Dover Mounds also had elongated skulls that were greatly deformed. If all the reports and research from the 1800s and early 1900s is to be believed, there was definitely a race of giant people living in North America way before Europeans arrived. The biggest question is, why is this not talked about more, and why is any information on the subject so hard to find? Why is this research being discreetly buried, and why do modern scientists refuse to talk about the legitimate truth of our giant ancestors? Then again, maybe the skeletons found at the Kentucky Dover Mound weren't that big to begin with, and we have been lied to. The truth may be more confusing than we know, but if giants did truly exist, it looks like they existed from North America and down into the jungles of the Amazon. And this begs another question: why did giants exist in the Americas and not in Europe or in Asia? Do you believe that giants walked the earth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. From a mysterious black tomb to a bizarre ancient cult that worshipped a snake god, here are 10 recent archaeological discoveries from Egypt. Untouched mummies. It seems like there is a never-ending supply of mummies in Egypt. Everywhere you turn, there's a mummy under the ground just waiting to be uncovered. One of the more recent discoveries actually revealed 14 new mummies that had gone untouched for over 2,500 years in a tomb in Saqqara. What makes this such an alarming recent discovery is that it happened in the middle of the pandemic. After such an already turbulent year, people all over the world sounded off their opinions about leaving these coffins closed. While science is pretty skeptical about curses and magic, that did not stop lots of people from speaking out against the ancient coffins, saying it would be a bad idea to open them because 2020 had been a horrible year already. What if one of the coffins contained a plague? What if one of the coffins contained a curse that could potentially end the world? Of course, neither of those things were likely to happen, and Egyptologists were excited that such an amazing discovery happened during such hard times. The coffins really were quite impressive. The paint was still perfect, the faces were recognizable, and all 14 were some of the most exquisitely preserved sarcophagi ever brought out of the ground. What's even more incredible about these coffins is that they were discovered only 10 miles south of the Giza pyramids. How in the world did everyone miss these buried treasures for so long? Mysterious Black Tomb. One of the most recent Egyptian discoveries is the mysterious Black Tomb, which was uncovered in Alexandria. Alexandria was one of the most prominent cities of the ancient world, named after the infamous conqueror Alexander the Great of Macedonia. Near the city is also the old site of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, which has since been built over with a fort. What makes the Black Tomb especially intriguing is that it was initially thought that it could contain the remains of Alexander the Great himself, or even a deadly curse. Unfortunately, experts unsealed it very recently, and no curses were discovered. Instead, inside the black granite sarcophagus, researchers found 3 skeletons and something that looked a lot like red sewage water. They also discovered a very horrible stench the moment they opened the lid. According to an article from the BBC, the stench was so horrible that the researchers had to vacate the area and go back later with the help from Egyptian military engineers. The 3 skeletons inside of the sarcophagus were likely part of a family burial, but the remains were not very well mummified. In fact, the inside of the sarcophagus looked more like a witch's disgusting soup than any normal coffin. Who exactly the skeletons were is still a mystery, and as of July 2018, the site has been cleared for fear that the sarcophagus was releasing lethal toxic fumes. Would you have recommended opening these tombs? I would have advised against it, or at least using X-ray technology to see what was inside before opening it. Let me know what you would have done in the comments below, then be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Just this week, there have been loads of amazing discoveries around the world, and you won't want to miss any of the reports. Giant Pharaoh Statue. Archaeologists never stop digging. An archaeological team just recently pieced together more than 6,000 individual fragments of a statue of King Psamtik I from the ancient city of Heliopolis, located in modern Cairo. It wasn't even found at a popular archaeological site. The statue was first uncovered in a working-class suburb in the city. Researchers first believed it was a depiction of Ramesses II, one of the most famous rulers in Egyptian history. In fact, it was a minor disappointment when they found out who it really belonged to. Psamtik I was a less well-known pharaoh who ruled 6 centuries after Ramesses II, from 664 BC to 610 BC. After piecing together all the fragments, researchers used 3D reconstruction to determine the original size and appearance of the statue. And this is incredibly exciting, as the statue was about 26 feet 8 meters tall. That's enormous for an ancient statue. One of the reasons that this is such a surprising discovery is that ever since Ramesses II, the statues made in ancient Egypt got smaller and smaller. It's incredibly rare to see such a big masterpiece from so late in Egyptian history. However, it should be no surprise to Egyptologists who know the story of this unique king. According to CNN, Psamtik I actually founded the Renaissance movement in Egypt and started a cultural revolution that included religion, art, and architecture. This is probably why his statue was so much bigger than those that came over the previous 600 years. Shabti figurines. There have been a lot of amazing discoveries coming out of Saqqara, Egypt in recent years. There have been dozens of new mummies found, lots of new burial tombs, and so many shafts it would make anyone's jaw drop. But one of the cooler finds comes from 5 new limestone sarcophagi and 4 wooden coffins that were recently discovered in 2020. They were found inside of a burial shaft that stretched an amazing 27 feet below the ground. The shaft was discovered inside of a region of the city known as Sacred Animal Necropolis, and among the treasures found were hundreds of fantastic artifacts and figurines. There were approximately 365 Shabti figurines discovered in this burial shaft. Some of the figures are inscribed with hieroglyphics that are still visible even after all these years. If you're not sure what exactly a Shabti figurine is, it's a small statue that would be buried in an Egyptian grave to help the body in the afterlife. They were essentially little totems, but they weren't the only artifacts found. Inside the burial shaft, there was also a small wooden obelisk painted with the figure Isis, who was the Egyptian god associated with rebirth. There were also depictions of Nephthys, the god of death. Excavations in this area have been going on since 2018 and are still active. It's one of the oldest sites in all of Egypt and is home to the Step Pyramid, which is believed to be the oldest pyramid in the entire world. It's located only 20 miles, 32 kilometers south of Cairo. Ancient coffins at Luxor. These excavations all took place in Egypt, so no one should be surprised to see even more mummies. 30 ancient coffins were discovered in 2019 at a site in Luxor, which at one point had been the ancient city of Thebes. According to CNN, Egyptian authorities revealed the striking contents of 30 ancient wooden coffins, most of which included mummies. While it was not broadcast a lot on the news, this was actually the biggest discovery in Egypt in over 100 years. It was also the first stash of coffins ever discovered by Egyptian researchers. This is because almost all the incredible finds in Egypt over the past few hundred years have been uncovered by foreign archaeological dig teams. The last giant discovery was in 1891, and it was orchestrated by foreigners. As you can imagine, the Egyptians are very proud of this newest discovery. They unveiled the 30 mummies in front of the impressive Hatshepsut temple in the Valley of the Kings. According to the reports, the coffins are believed to be around 3,000 years old. 26th Dynasty discovery. In May of 2020, an astonishing discovery was made by the Egyptian-Spanish archaeological mission. What they discovered was a unique cemetery that dates all the way back to the 26th Dynasty, formerly known as El Sawi era of Egypt. They made the discovery in the Minya Governorate, a region of Egypt rich in archaeological history. The Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities has claimed the cemetery is very unique, as it is in a style not previously discovered. Some other ancient discoveries in the area include papyri that date back to Roman Egypt. In fact, it's been estimated that around 70% of all literary paper discovered in Egypt has come from this region, but not all the secrets have been revealed yet. This cemetery would have been active between 664 BC and 332 BC, and it's not the only one. Other excavations in the area have discovered Roman-era tombs with domed ceilings, Roman tombstones, and bronze coins. While this cemetery does not appear to contain anyone overly important, it does come from an important time in Egyptian history following a period of foreign rule by the ruthless Nubian 25th dynasty. It was during the 26th dynasty that Egypt was united, freed from Assyrian control, and brought back to prosperity. In case you didn't know, ancient Egypt had an extremely volatile history of being conquered, liberated, and then conquered again. Ramesses II era discovery. In the Old Kingdom of Egypt, Memphis was the capital city. Today it's located just a few miles away from Giza. According to an announcement from the Supreme Council of Antiquities, a number of unique carved stone blocks have been discovered in the area that date back to the rule of Ramesses II. The statues are made of pink and black granite, as well as some that are made of limestone. The excavation team also found limestone blocks that dated back to the Coptic era, which has led researchers to believe the blocks the Egyptians used to build a lot of their statues actually ended up being recycled in later eras. Another part of this discovery was a giant statue of Pharaoh Ramesses II and some smaller statues that represented various deities. Included among the deities was the warrior goddess Sekhmet, who is often viewed as the protector of the pharaohs and was the deity who would lead them into warfare. Another deity that was discovered at this site was the sky goddess Hathor, who was the symbolic mother to the pharaohs. And finally, a statue of Ptah was also discovered nearby. Ptah was seen as the god of creation and existed before any other thing in the universe. The excavation is still going on at the site as of July 2020, and it's expected that even more amazing relics will be discovered. If you want a bit of background on Ramesses II, he was by far the most powerful pharaoh of the 19th dynasty and the New Kingdom. He was also one of the longest living monarchs in Egyptian history. During his long reign, Ramesses II focused on leaving a massive legacy behind, which consisted of many cities, temples, and monuments. It's believed that he ruled Egypt between 1279 BC and 1213 BC. The world's oldest papyrus. This is one of the most amazing discoveries ever made in Egypt. It all began with some handwritten notes from an English traveler in the 19th century and some documents from two French pilots in the 1950s. Using these notes, Pierre Tallet made an unbelievable discovery. According to Smithsonian Magazine, he found a set of 30 caves inside some limestone hills in a very remote part of the Egyptian desert. These hills were miles inland, very far from the Red Sea and very far from any ancient or modern city. The caves had been sealed and hidden completely from view. If not for the documentation of the pilots and the old English traveler, nobody would have ever found these caves. The first digging session was in 2011, in which it became apparent that the caves had been used as a boat storage during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. That's around 4,600 years ago. Then during the third digging session just recently, an entire collection of papyrus was found almost completely intact, written in hieroglyphics and written in hieratic, which was the cursive script that the ancient Egyptians used. After decoding the writing, it became clear that this discovery was incredible. It was a handwritten journal of a man who had been around during the construction of the Great Pyramid, which of course is a tomb for the mighty pharaoh Khufu. The journal tells of the man's journey across Egypt while he made all kinds of deliveries, and it outlines everything researchers have ever wanted to know about ancient Egypt in that time, including where the stone came from for the pyramids and even the political situation at the time. The wealth of knowledge inside the journal is fantastic. Snake cult. Rare footage has just been released of an ancient Egyptian funeral home thanks to National Geographic. In the video, you can very clearly see the burial complex, which is located beneath the desert sands about 20 miles, 32 kilometers away from Cairo. Estimates place the funeral home and burial complex at being operational in 600 BC. The site has allowed researchers to discover more about the business side of embalming and mummification, and it turns out mummification was actually a very serious and lucrative business. The sarcophagi found inside the underground burial complex linked to the funeral home revealed sarcophagi completely sealed for 2,600 years. In this complex, archaeologists also discovered the first gilded silver mummy mask since 1939. But the weirdest part is the snake cult. Inside the complex, researchers discovered evidence of a previously unknown cult dedicated to a snake goddess. They were known as priests of Neochaeus, and up until now nobody had known that they existed. Even with the discovery, very little is known about the cultists. It makes you wonder just what kind of craziness was going on behind the scenes in ancient Egypt that even our best researchers still don't know about. Hunt for Cleopatra. A recently made discovery in Egypt is offering clues as to the current whereabouts of Cleopatra's tomb. Cleopatra is undoubtedly the most famous ancient queen to have ever lived. She has been immortalized throughout the ages as a beautiful and intelligent leader and is still well known today in popular culture. But despite all of Cleopatra's fame, nobody to this day knows where her tomb is hidden. Some people believe it was buried in Alexandria, where she ruled from her royal palace, which tumbled into the ocean after the Great Tsunami of 365 AD. Others think her final resting place could be in the ancient temple of Taposiris Magna, just a few miles away from Alexandria. A recent discovery of two high-status mummies who lived during the time of Cleopatra might actually shed some light on where exactly her resting place sits. According to The Guardian, this discovery is being described as sensational because the necropolis where the two mummies were found is being linked to Cleopatra. Evidence suggests the two mummies were initially buried completely covered with expensive gold leaf. This was a luxury only given to the very top tier of society. This means the two individuals probably knew Cleopatra herself and could have played some pivotal role in her kingdom. Because this discovery happened at one of the probable sites for Cleopatra's tomb in Taposiris Magna, researchers are starting to suspect that somewhere in that general area, Cleopatra is still mummified inside her tomb. We could be months away from finally uncovering the legendary tomb of the Queen of Egypt. Do you think we will ever find her tomb? What is your favorite discovery from ancient Egypt? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks as always for watching, and see you again soon for another awesome video. From one of the most impressive dinosaurs ever found to the latest discovery of extraterrestrial life, here are 10 incredible recent discoveries. Stegosaurus bones. In Morocco, a new species of Stegosaurus has been uncovered. Scientists are believing that this dinosaur dates back to around 168 million years ago during the Jurassic period. Everyone knows and adores the Stegosaurus. It's one of the most popular dinosaurs next to the T-Rex, and British scientists are now believing that the new species discovered in 2019 is the oldest of its kind. In case you need a bit of extra info on the Stegosaurus, it's an armored dinosaur recognizable because of its armor-plated bones and the spikes on its tail. Even though the specimen found in Morocco only contained a few vertebrae, scientists managed to conclude it is indeed a new species. The researchers gave it a very long and confusing name that there's no way I can repeat, but in the local Berber language, it translates to mountain lizard, and that's kind of what a Stegosaurus looks like, a great big armored mountain lizard that can eat you. Interestingly enough, this is also the first Stegosaurus to ever be found in North Africa. For you dinosaur lovers, this one's for you. Apparently, National Geographic has come out with a new documentary on what dinos looked like based on the technology we have today. Have you seen it? Let me know in the comments below. Alien life. A recent discovery from NASA could be life-changing. According to the chief over at NASA, scientists may be on the verge of finding real alien life. This is after groundbreaking research on Mars and Venus has placed us one step closer to answering the timeless question of whether we are alone in the universe or not. Scientists announced in September of 2020 that the presence of a very unique gas on Venus is hinting at the possibility of alien microbes being alive on the planet. This is coming just 2 years after the Mars Curiosity rover found evidence of complex organic material in the soil of the red planet. And now scientists are coming beginning to understand that there are other places in our solar system where life could be lurking. Another great possibility is Saturn's moon. While the life discovered is tiny and microbial, that is the exact type of life that we developed from in the first place. That means that perhaps in 500 million years there could be small animals and insects crawling around on Venus or even on Mars. It also means that with a little bit of a push, these planets could probably sustain life much better than we previously thought. Do you think there is life on other planets? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell if you are new here. We have lots more videos like this. 250,000-year-old teeth. There has been a rather sensational discovery in Siberia just recently. This happened in October of 2020 when researchers discovered teeth inside of a cave in Siberia that date back 250,000 years. There were actually 2 milk teeth and 1 molar found in the cave. The team from the Novosibirsk Institute of Archaeology and Ethnography were digging in the lowest layers of the cave when they found the teeth. But what's even stranger is that the 2 milk teeth were 250,000 years old, but the molar found nearby only dates back to 170,000 years. According to the researchers, both teeth belong to an extinct group of ancient humans known as Denisovans who lived across much of Asia. But the story gets weirder and weirder. Siberian scientists also discovered a tiny finger bone that they believe belonged to a female who had lived inside that cave around 41,000 years ago. The finger bone went through analysis, and it was then revealed that she was a Neanderthal and very closely related to a modern human. But the real story here is that people, at least ancient people, had been living in that cave for around 250,000 years. To make this a little clearer, we started out as cave people, lived inside of a cave in Siberia for almost 210,000 years, crawled out of it just 40,000 years ago, only figured out how to farm around 10,000 years ago, and just figured out how to fly planes 100 years ago. Just let the incredible scale of our evolution sink in there for a minute. New species of electric eels. Just recently, a fish detective has uncovered a new species of electric eel. Love them or hate them, electric eels are absolutely fascinating. They have unique electrical organs inside their bodies that allow them to produce an electric shock when threatened. But yeah, they are pretty ugly. In any case, a Smithsonian researcher and self-proclaimed fish detective found 2 new species of electric eels after spending years in the Amazon rainforest studying and documenting the creatures. What's interesting about this discovery is that most scientists thought we had already discovered all the electric eels in existence, but the fish detective proved them wrong. The new eels are not specifically interesting, they're just electric eels, just slightly different from each other. It is fascinating that this one guy stood in the middle of the jungle for 12 or 16 hours at a time just to study and document the fish. In fact, the researcher plans to continue all the way into 2022. The doctor and his team are trying to identify the range of voltages produced by the new eel species. They want to sequence the entire genome of electric eels so that they can better study the animal's ecology and behavior. Terrifying mosquitoes. If you live in an area thick with mosquitoes, you know how awful they are. If you've ever been to Africa, many parts of Asia, or in any jungle anywhere, you will know how terrifying mosquitoes really are. But a recent discovery is saying that mosquitoes are actually more terrifying than we have ever known. Yes, they are responsible for more deaths than any war ever thanks to their ability to spread disease, but it actually turns out, according to a study published in Nature, that mosquitoes which carry malaria actually use the wind to travel extremely long distances and escape the harsh and brutal conditions of the desert. This may not sound alarming, but it absolutely is. Smithsonian researchers analyzed thousands of mosquitoes caught by using sticky panels and helium balloons, and they found that many of the infected mosquitoes had traveled hundreds of miles by simply riding on the wind. This means that as wind patterns change, mosquitoes infected with malaria can end up in places that they have not been before. If you've been enjoying your European summer free of mosquitoes, just wait until the winds from the Sahara dump 10 million mosquitoes with malaria in the center of Prague. That will really spice things up a bit. Of course, that's an exaggerated example, but the point is that the scourge of the mosquitoes is far more mobile than we previously thought. The good news is that by studying how they move, we may be able to prevent a future outbreak. Ancient human migration. Arguably the most interesting point in human existence was when we turned from nomads into farmers. The movement of our ancient human ancestors through Asia and especially through North America was a crucial time for humanity. If we had never crossed from eastern Siberia and migrated into North America, or even if we had just shown up a few years too late, Christopher Columbus would have arrived in America to find it completely empty. It would have actually been a new world. A recent discovery is shedding some light on human movements across the globe around 8,000 years ago. By studying ancient DNA, researchers have identified a complex pattern of human migrations, both eastward and westward. By mapping out how the ancient humans moved across the globe, especially when they were on the brink of farming, we can learn a lot about our own backgrounds. Basically, the movement of humans during the advent of farming resulted in a diverse genetic gradient across all of the globe that can still be seen today. To put it as simply as possible, this new research is showing that not only was there a huge population movement from Eurasia into Europe in the 3rd millennium, which spread Indo-European languages, but there was also a great migration from the steppe in Central Asia to South Asia. This basically shows the exact moment when humanity split between Europe and Asia, with one group migrating west and the other migrating south. Potential alien planets. Let's move off our planet again for the next discovery. In 2019, 2 alien planets were found surrounding a nearby star that could potentially be very similar to Earth. This is not great news for us right now, as there's not much we can do about it, but in a few hundred years, if we ever start branching out into the solar system, we are going to need these types of possibly inhabitable planets, and researchers just found 2 more of them. They are actually located pretty close, all things considered. The planets are orbiting a sun known as Teegarden's star, which is only about 12.5 light years from us. That's only 6 trillion miles. According to an article from Space, the 2 planets resemble the 2 inner planets of our own solar system. They're only a little heavier than Earth and are still in the habitable zone. Just like Earth and Mars, this means that there could be water in a liquid form on the surface of one of these planets. This news comes from part of a special research team who searches for exoplanets using incredibly advanced technology. The only issue with these 2 newly discovered planets is that the star they orbit produces less light and less energy than our own sun. This could make it very hard to get a good tan if we ever end up moving 12.5 light years from Earth. It also means that the planet would have to be closer to the sun and that each orbit around the sun would be much shorter. Imagine if the sun was as close as the moon and every day was only 16 or 18 hours. These are the kinds of challenges we will face when landing on new planets. African swine fever. In October 2020, 3 cases of African swine fever were discovered in wild boar in the east of Germany. This is not a fun or exciting discovery, it's actually pretty scary, and you won't hear many people talking about it. This newest batch of African swine fever cases brings the total to 53 since the Germans found the first one in early September. The only good thing is that all of the cases of African swine fever were found in wild animals and not in farm animals, but that did not stop China from actually banning the import of German pork in September after the first case was confirmed. That should be extremely alarming to anyone. The only good news is that this disease is not dangerous to humans, it is only fatal to pigs, but a massive outbreak could potentially destroy the pork supply for the world. Another risk, obviously, when it comes to an animal disease is that it somehow mutates and then does become harmful to humans. The fact that in a single month there have been confirmed 53 cases discovered of African swine fever in wild animals in Germany is not something to snort about. If you're watching this video down the road in 2021 and are wondering why pork is so expensive, this discovery could have something to do with it. Humans stopped the Ice Age. It's incredible that in 2020, people still don't believe in global warming. It's even more incredible considering the recent discovery that the Ice Age has actually been delayed thanks to humans by around 100,000 years. The effects of global warming around the world are so severe that we have not only stopped the incoming Ice Age, but have delayed it inevitably. In a report by CNN, they say that researchers are suggesting that humans have interfered so significantly with the natural carbon balance of the planet that the next glacial cycle is not coming anytime soon. Scientists in Germany recently found that the last 8 ice ages on Earth are all able to be explained by a relationship between solar radiation hitting the surface of the Earth and CO2 concentrations in our atmosphere. By using that information, scientists were able to predict the future of glacial cycles, also known as ice ages. The takeaway from this discovery is that by burning fossil fuels over the past 100 years, we have affected the climate of the planet for the next 100,000 years. There's actually no reversing it at this point. To put this in some perspective, it usually takes around 10,000 years or more for the planet to cool enough to usher in a brief ice age of a few thousand years. But in just 1 century, we have heated the planet so much that there is no chance of an ice age happening again until probably people are extinct or living on Mars. Beaked whale. Everyone loves a new species discovery. It's definitely a lot more fun than discoveries of diseases and pollution. Off the coast of Hokkaido in Japan, a new species of beaked whale has been confirmed. Beaked whales are nothing new to Japan. Whalers have known about them for years. However, a research group managed by Hokkaido University collected 6 unidentified specimens along the coast of the Okhotsk Sea. It became apparent that they were dealing with a new species. The new whales that they discovered looked much like the old beaked whales already familiar to the locals, but they had different external characteristics that were quite noticeable, like the proportions of their body and their color. They had shorter beaks, smaller bodies, and a darker color compared to the already known species. This prompted a study which eventually yielded the results, which were published in the journal Scientific Reports. It turned out that yes, the researchers had stumbled upon a totally new species of beaked whale, which they then named B. minimus because of its smaller body. While this may sound like a great big boring story, it's actually pretty interesting considering how large these whales are and how little we know about them. For example, the leader of the research team says that they still don't know what an adult female beaked whale looks like. The whales live extremely deep in the ocean, and because of this, they are very difficult to spot. At the end of the day, the point is that scientists are still discovering a variety of different ocean species, even today. From ancient pieces of a 400-million-year-old piece of technology to underground fighter jets, here are 10 of the most incredible and mysterious archaeological finds ever. Puquios. In the dry valleys of southern Peru, an area famous for the mysterious Nazca lines, there lies another mystery to behold known as Puquios. That's right, there is more to the landscape than the large spiraling lines through the valley. An underground network of ancient aqueducts can be found containing trenches, tunnels, and wells that bring water from the underground up to the surface. Thought to have been constructed by the same people who created the Nazca geoglyphs, many of the aqueducts are still used by the inhabitants of the valley today. Spiraling funnel-shaped holes called ojos can be seen on the surface, with some as wide as 50 feet, 15 meters, at the opening. They provided access to the water in the tunnel as well as serving as entrances for cleaning and maintenance. The wells also allowed wind into the canals to force the water through the system. The lower end of the system has open trenches that allowed the public to access it for drinking water, for bathing, and for washing clothes. They also used it as a channel for agricultural purposes. Although archaeologists have known about these aqueducts for a long time, they had not been able to pinpoint their age. Because they are made from the same materials as the surrounding terrain, it was difficult to carbon date them. They first appeared in historical text in 1605 from the writings of a Spanish Catholic priest, but some archaeologists believe that they could have been built by pre-Columbian people around 540 CE to combat prolonged droughts that struck the area at the time, with some possibly as old as 3,000 years or as recent as 1,250 years. These unique structures still hold many secrets buried underground. Wheel of the Gods. A prehistoric stone monument found in the Middle East that originally went unnoticed for centuries is now believed to have been used for gruesome sky burials. The monument, known as Gilgal Rephaim in the Golan Heights region, is roughly as old as Stonehenge, but archaeologists still don't know why it was built or who built it. Some theorize it was an ancient calendar or sky burial site where dead bodies were placed on top of stone mounds to be picked apart by vultures. It was first spotted by archaeologists who were doing an aerial survey of the region in 1967. Its concentric stone circles were what first caught their eye, but a number of later excavations revealed it to be one of the oldest and largest structures in the region. Flint tools and shards of pottery were also found there and helped to date the site, with some scholars agreeing construction could have started as early as 3500 BC. Its name, which means stone heap of the wildcat, has a 15-foot 4.5 meters high burial chamber at the center of 5 circles, the largest of which measures more than 500 feet, 160 meters wide. Made from thousands of smaller rocks that together weigh over 40,000 tons, the monument still has many mysteries to behold. When standing inside the complex, it resembles a labyrinth of crumbling stones. Some still wonder whether the structure was built around its central burial mound or whether it was added later on. Either way, the impressive site is believed to have been constructed by a nomadic civilization in the area, which still lends an air of mystery to this huge monument. Who do you think it is? Could it just be a burial site for the mysterious sky burial? Or could there be some type of mysterious alternative purpose? Could this even have been a prehistoric landing pad for extraterrestrial spacecraft? It seems unlikely, but no one knows for sure. Let me know your opinion in the comments below, and after that be sure to click the subscribe button if you haven't already. If you like learning about these archaeological discoveries, you'll love the other videos that are in store. Obsidian monkey jar. Mexico's National Anthropology Museum has many interesting and ancient items in its collections, but the origin of one of its most famous objects is still up for debate. An exquisite jar made from obsidian, a black stone, shows a monkey holding its tail above its head. Measuring 6 inches, 15 centimeters high, the jar was first showcased in the museum's first major catalog 50 years ago, and was described by Mexican archaeologist and historian Ramon Piñachón as one of the most valuable pieces in the museum and an absolute unique model. But some still question what the jar actually depicts, and its construction is even more puzzling. The vessel features a stylized monkey and is smoothly polished. But how would ancient people such as the Aztecs have been able to not only carve the jar with such intricate details, but to also polish it to such a pristine shine? Stone effigy vessels were usually created from a single piece of stone that was cut from the raw material using strings. Further cutting, drilling, grinding, and chiseling were also required before the piece was finished and it could be polished. Artisans carved the vessels with hollow drill bits made from long animal bones and reeds. Although there are several other monkey effigy vessels known to scholars, only one is a funerary offering. Explorers continue to guess whether the jar was made for members of the elite class and why they decided to use a spider monkey on the effigy. The ancient vessel was obtained by a doctor who saw it in the home of his patient in the late 1800s. Purchased from the farmer who found it on a hacienda in exchange for sheep, the museum later purchased the jar so it could remain in the country where it was made. That doesn't answer the question as to why the original creator created the monkey jar and how they managed to make such an exquisite piece with their limited resources. Kamchatka Peninsula. In 2013, archaeologists from the University of St. Petersburg discovered a strange object made from metal parts on a remote peninsula. The reason why this is so strange is that the object is some 400 million years old, and the components are gears that are similar to those found in a watch or computer. Inlaid in rock where it was found, the object is made from metal parts that formed a mechanism. The strange fossil, found by hikers, has hundreds of toothed cylinders making up the machine. Perfectly preserved in stone, archaeologists had to cordon off the area to prevent serious, curious onlookers. Could the object have been created 400 million years ago by some sort of intelligent being who had astonishing technological capabilities? Or could the object have simply fallen into a swamp or some other location that allowed it to reach fossilization and age in a shorter period of time? Whatever the case, this mysterious discovery continues to puzzle conspiracy theorists and archaeologists alike. Viking rock runestone. The climate crisis continues to be a topic of debate for environmentalists and the average Earth lover to this day, but a series of ancient carvings on a Viking monument may show that even then the ancient people were worried about the cold climate crisis. A 9th century stone monument found in Sweden is believed to have been erected by Vikings. Weighing 5 tons and standing over 8 feet tall, 2.5 meters, there are 28 lines in the runic inscription. But even if you understand the symbols, that doesn't even mean you may necessarily be able to decode it. Written on the stone are riddle-like messages dedicated to various Norse mythologies. With more than 700 runes and other characters, there is only one line that is damaged, but that doesn't make deciphering them any easier. Until early 2020, scholars were able to read the inscriptions, but they didn't necessarily know what they meant. However, a study by scholars from Swedish universities were able to decode the message, and what they found was quite interesting. Some of the inscriptions are about the anxiety of the author over his son's death, as well as fears of a new cold climate crisis. Based on archaeological research from the years 536 to 550, Scandinavia was bombarded with a series of volcanic events that led to lower than average temperatures. Crops failed, people went hungry, and there were mass extinctions due to the catastrophe. The population of the Scandinavian peninsula fell by 50% during this time. By analyzing the text and the archaeology of the area, as well as the history of religions, scholars were able to decipher the carvings. Before the rune stone was erected, a number of other events, including a powerful solar storm, a cold summer that impeded crop growth, and a solar eclipse just after the sunrise, may have been what inspired the creator of the runestone to carve the ominous messages. Any of these events would have raised fears of the locals who believed in the Great Winter, the coming of Ragnarok, or the end of the world in Norse mythology, and could be the cold climate crisis they were fearful of. The Devil's Corkscrew. In the 19th century, when geologists began exploring the fossil beds found in Nebraska's Badlands, they came upon a curious group of spirals made from hardened sand. Nicknamed Devil's Corkscrews by local ranchers, the formations were believed to be the remnants of prehistoric plant matter or possibly sea sponges. It wasn't until later, when bones were discovered inside the corkscrews, that experts found the real culprit of these strange formations. An ancient animal similar to a beaver called the Paleocaster was the creator of the complex spirals, using them as homes. It wasn't until 1977, when experts found the signature teeth marks of beavers on the spirals, that they realized who had created them. With some standing 15 feet (4.5 meters) long, the spirals were created from 15 to 30 million years ago. Located in the Sioux country of Nebraska, they have two parts, namely the screw and a massive root that branches off from the lower end of the spiral. Located in about 500 square miles, 1,300 square kilometers of Nebraskan countryside, the spirals were first discovered in 1894 when an expedition set out to the Badlands of Wyoming, Nebraska Rocky Mountains looking for fossils. After finding some large corkscrews, the formations, composed of quartz, were first labeled as the work of the devil because they were so curious and had no explanation. Initially, explorers believed that they were made by some supernatural being, but the area where these fossils were found was once inhabited by an ancient beaver-like creature that lived in the North American Badlands during the late Oligocene period. The corkscrew-shaped burrows had side nesting chambers and other compartments that allowed for water drainage and to be used for the animals' excrement. When they were later abandoned by the animals, tree roots grew into the spiral-shaped burrows and fossilized. If you want to see these curious formations, head to the Agate Fossil Beds National Monument in northwestern Nebraska to see these unique creations. Su-25, MiG-25. When the United States sent teams to Iraq hunting for weapons of mass destruction, they ended up finding something they did not bargain for. Dozens of fighter jets from Iraq's Air Force were found buried beneath the sand, including one Cold War-era MiG-25 interceptor whose tail fins were poking up from the sand. A number of MiG-25 and Su-25 ground attack jets were also found buried in an airfield west of Baghdad. Intelligence experts estimated that Iraq had about 300 combat aircraft before the war started, all from the 1991 Kuwait War. Most of them were Soviet-made or older French fighters, as well as some of the most advanced fighter jets produced in the Soviet era. They originally escaped detection during the coalition bombing campaign, with some being buried or hidden under trees covered with camouflage sheets. Those that were destroyed in previous wars were littered across the airfield, so it would be difficult for bombers to choose their targets. The Russian fighter jets were found after American forces had already been working in the vicinity for weeks without knowing the aircraft were there. Their discovery is a stark illustration of the difficulty American forces faced while trying to find weapons of mass destruction in the country. The ancient city of Arkaim. Older than the ancient city of Troy, Arkaim is a 4,000-year-old settlement in the Ural Mountains. But its most curious feature is a circle some 530 feet, 170 meters in diameter of ancient stones. The prehistoric settlement is estimated to at one time have 20 towns, flourishing during the times of the pyramids were being built in Egypt. A site of strange burials and cave paintings, debate still rages over who the people were who lived there. Discovered in the late 1980s by a group of archaeologists who had been dispatched to the area to plan a new reservoir, strange embankments were discovered of a circular fortified settlement and clay ramparts over a log frame. Family dwellings were also found, including hearths, cellars, and wells, with early metal works and furnaces in each of the dwellings. More than 20 of the circular settlements have been found throughout the southern Urals in northern Kazakhstan, suggesting that the civilization was widespread with various townships built to house them. Ancient Stone Age cave paintings were found nearby, suggesting they depended on horses for chariots and farm work. A number of bodies were also found that had strange burial traditions, including the remains being placed in a fetal position while others were uniquely posed. The circular construction of the settlement also leads some to believe that it is tied to a Greek mythological city like Asgard and Atlantis, with some Russian writers believing its name Arkaim combined the words for sky and earth. It could mean that the ancient people looked to the skies for wisdom and religion. Selenographia. A one-time painter to the King and the Prince of Wales, John Russell, was an artist with a keen interest in astronomy. So enthralled by the beauty of the moon, he created a lunar globe known as Selenographia, which depicted the moon in intricate detail. A large lunar sphere that had a small terrestrial sphere, the globe was created to reproduce the motions of the moon with respect to the Earth. One side is illustrated with the other remaining blank, depicting how the moon is visible from Earth. Spending 30 years to perfect his map of the moon, Russell produced detailed drawings before he invented the Selenographia. Made from paper mache and covered with plaster, the lunar sphere is mounted on a heavy brass hemisphere with parts that are cut away to show its details. Created in 1797, the portrait artist designed it to show the wobble of the moon as it rotates. He used a micrometer and telescope to obtain accurate measurements of the moon as he created the globe. Made from brass and paper, the terrestrial globe is considered the oldest three-dimensional representation of the moon, with its brass mechanism allowing it to turn. Offering Table of Defg. A rare round table made from white alabaster, the Offering Table of Defg is a remarkable piece from ancient Egypt. Carved with intricate hieroglyphs, the detailed surface has small compartments, each with the name of a dish, a drink, or a purifying agent. With over 90 products in total, the top of the table also has 7 shallow cavities that are intended to hold a special oil. But who exactly was Defg? Also known as the acquaintance of the king, highly revered by the great god and great one of the Upper Egypt 10, Defg's round offering table is a rarity because most tables made for a similar purpose were rectangular. The tablet is made of 5 inches, 12 centimeters thick alabaster and is 19.3 inches, 50 centimeters in diameter. The rare artifact is a stunning example of the ancient civilization. Dating back to the 6th Dynasty, which ruled from 2323 to 2150 BC, the tablet is currently housed at the Museum of Antiquities in the Netherlands. Wondering what such a table was used for? A fundamental part of any ancient Egyptian funerary rite was to provide offerings to the deceased, and this tablet was used for that very reason, to ensure life after death for the deceased. Created during the time of the Old Kingdom, which is more known for the construction of the pyramids, the tablet of Defg is another ancient relic that shows off the artistry of some of Egypt's most gifted stonemasons. With many prominent titles, Defg is a bit of an anomaly, but with such an intricate table created for him, he must have been a man of great importance. Which of these strange archaeological discoveries is the most impressive to you? From the most remote islands in the world to an extreme community at the edge of existence, here are 10 of the most isolated communities at the end of the Earth. Easter Island. It's hard to find a more isolated community than Easter Island. This place was so remote that the people who lived there basically went extinct because they ran out of resources. This is something that has not happened to any other society in the world. Imagine you lived on an island and suddenly you ran out of trees. It would basically mean the end of your civilization. Easter Island is located off the Chilean coast, and it's only about 64 square miles, 165 square kilometers. Not only is Easter Island one of the most remote places in the world, but it's also one of the most mysterious. There have been a lot of theories thrown around about the collapse and the society that lived there, and there have been plenty of conspiracy theories surrounding the giant statues that dot the entire island. The first inhabitants only arrived about 900 years ago, and the total population only ever increased into the low thousands. The island would have had chiefs, priests, fishermen, farmers, and people who built the giant statues. But because of their isolation from the rest of the world, these guys went in a totally weird direction. They were obsessed with building the huge Moai statues, and many believe this was their downfall. Today, there are only a few people still living on the island, and they mostly cater to tourists who fly in from mainland Chile. Utqiaġvik, Alaska. Let's jump to the northernmost town in the United States. As you probably already guessed, this is in Alaska. It's the town of Utqiaġvik. And every year from between November and January, there is absolute darkness. This phenomenon is known as a polar night, and for 2 full months, there is not a single drop of sunlight in this town. It's literally like walking into the heart of darkness. In terms of isolated communities at the edge of the world, if you're here in the winter, it literally feels like you're at the end of existence. It feels like the lights have gone out and they are never coming back on. The town was known as Barrow until it changed its name in 2016. It's completely surrounded by wild tundra and not accessible by road. You can only arrive by taking an airplane. Between December and March, the average high temperatures remains below 0. And according to Business Insider, this isolated region is home to only around 4,000 people. The local Inupiat people call this place home, and there are a handful of scientists who come to the area for special studies. To give you a rough idea of just how isolated this little town is, it's 500 miles from Fairbanks in Alaska, and Fairbanks is already a pretty isolated place. If you were to look at the map, you would see that this town is literally at the top of the world. It's located on the northern tip of Alaska. You can't get more northern unless you feel like taking a trip to Canada or Russia, and yes, it is located near the North Pole. But so far, there have been no sightings of Santa Claus. Have you ever visited Alaska? What did you do there? Did you see any crazy wildlife? What about glaciers? Let me know what you did on your trip in the comments below. Also, remember to subscribe if you have not already. There are lots more cool videos being released very soon right here on Titanic, and you won't want to miss them. Utqiaġvik, Greenland. The town of Utqiaġvik in Greenland is one of the most isolated places in the world. Just getting to here is an adventure in itself. The closest neighbor to the city is the largest national park in the world. Other than a few humans that live in the town, this place is mostly populated by birds, polar bears, reindeer, and walrus. The city is located next to the largest and deepest fjord system in the world. Coming here really feels like coming to another realm of existence. It's almost like you're on another planet. Even though this town has a magnificent coastline, it's inaccessible for 9 months out of the year because of sea ice. No ships are able to dock in the town. That means for only 3 months, the town becomes one of the most important destinations for expeditionary vessels, exploring the vast nature and wildlife of northeastern Greenland. The only way the community that lives here can survive is by hunting and fishing, and if you want to have some fun, your only options here are the wilderness. In the spring, when the ice is still thick on the ocean, many of the local people go camping on the ice or partake in dog sledding. Siwa Oasis, Western Desert. The Siwa Oasis is one of the most secluded communities in Africa. It's definitely the most isolated place in Egypt. It's located in the Western Desert, about 30 miles from the Libyan border, and the culture here is completely different from the rest of Egypt. It's nothing but a small oasis town in the middle of the desert. There is a small area with palm trees and pools, and all on the outskirts are sand dunes and desolation. The people who live here have developed their own way of living, their own language, and their own customs. It's one of the last places on Earth where women are pretty much never seen in public. The Siwa Oasis is also one of the best places to go on a desert safari. Just be careful that you don't get lost in the sprawling nothingness. Even though it's not exactly at the end of the world, when you're standing on the top of a sand dune looking out at miles and miles of sand, it definitely feels like you've reached the end of somewhere. Getting to this place is also a huge hassle. You have to take a train for 5 hours from Cairo and then a bus for at least 4 hours through the desert. As you can imagine, before trains and buses, this place was not visited a whole lot. That said, there is an ancient oracle temple in the oasis where it's claimed that Alexander the Great once came asking for advice, though it is little more than a ruin now. Via las Estrellas, Antarctica. Via las Estrellas is one of only 2 civilian settlements on the continent of Antarctica. As you can probably guess all on your own, this place is really at the end of the world in every sense of the term. This place has 14 homes, a single banker, 1 post office, a small school with 2 teachers, a church, and a small souvenir shop for the brave tourists who seek out this little town. Via las Estrellas actually translates from Spanish as Stars Town, most likely because at night there is almost 0 light pollution, and so you can see the entire scope of the galaxy overhead. The population here is just around 100 during the summer, and there are even fewer people in the winter. It really makes you wonder what kind of isolated cabin fever type drama goes on here in the winter when there's only about 50 people around. La Rinconada, Peru. La Rinconada is the highest town in the world, completely isolated from the rest of Peru, way up in the Peruvian Andes. According to the New Yorker, this town in southern Peru is home to only about 50,000 people. It sits at an elevation of 16,728 feet, 5,100 meters above sea level. To put that in perspective, it's only about 3,000 feet shorter than the peak of Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. At such an outstanding height, it is the highest town on the planet. It's located about 50 miles, 80 kilometers north of Lake Titicaca, and only 10 miles, 16 kilometers from the Bolivian border. But before you think about taking an adventure to this town, keep in mind many visitors have experienced crippling altitude sickness, which often comes included with headaches, nausea, and shortness of breath, all for free. But if you are particularly susceptible, a bad case of altitude sickness can also leave you dead. But don't be too scared. With a bit of preparation, you can absolutely visit this isolated town at the edge of nowhere. It feels like you're in a city out of a dream, with nothing surrounding you except the glory of the Peruvian Andes and the snow-capped mountain peaks. This town started as a temporary settlement, but from 2001 to 2009, the town population exploded by 230%. This is because the town is literally sitting on a gold mine. The entire town is basically full of gold miners who made the trip up the mountain to try and cash in on some of that gold action. Alert, Canada. The town of Alert in Canada is arguably the most isolated community in the entire world. It's located in the province of Nunavut, and it sits about 500 miles from the nearest community. But the people who live in this remote place are not there for fun, they're typically only there to work. This is because there is a weather and intelligence station located in Alert, and it's home to fewer than 200 people. Most of them are members of the armed forces, or they are civilian contractors. In the summer, there are 24 hours of sunlight in Alert, and in the winter there are 24 hours of darkness. If you're afraid of the cold, this is the last place you want to go. In the coldest months, the temperature drops to about negative 58 degrees Fahrenheit. That's enough to freeze the mustache right off your face. There are even icebergs floating around in the harbor. Plus, there is a single person whose job it is to keep the station safe from polar bear attacks, since they often roam extremely close to where people are working. If you want to witness a polar bear in the wild, this is the right place to do it. If you're wondering what the people here do for fun, the answer is not much. It's not like they have high-speed internet. Most of the people stationed here spend their time playing cards or participating in sports. There's also some pretty great hiking, but you always have to be careful of being eaten by a polar bear. Tórshavn, Faroe Islands. Tórshavn in the Faroe Islands is the smallest capital city in the world. It also has an extremely rich history. First, it was a very popular trading post for the Vikings back around 825 AD. It even housed the Norse government at the time. It's extremely isolated with a population of only around 20,000 people according to Insider magazine. Within just minutes of pretty much anywhere, you can be standing at the edge of existence looking out across the Great Blue Ocean. This place is so remote that they speak Faroese, an ancient language derived from the original Norsemen who settled on the islands over 1,000 years ago. It's very close to Icelandic, but after 1,000 years of isolation, it became its own kind of language. There are even unique horses known as Faroese horses that live on the island. They look pretty much like normal horses, but it's still pretty cool. This is definitely one of the quaintest towns that any person can visit. Tórshavn has wooden houses that date back as far as 400 years ago. While it might not be as close to the edge of the world as Alert in Canada, it's definitely isolated enough that if the world ever ended, this place would probably keep going on as if nothing ever happened. Pitcairn Island. The Faroe Islands are extreme, but Pitcairn Island is about as extreme as it gets. This tiny island only has 50 residents and can only be accessed with a yacht. There are no planes, there are obviously no roads, and there are no big cruise ships that land there. The island is located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, more than 3,000 miles from any continent. It's literally a dot in the middle of the sea. The main industry on the island is tourism, and the inhabitants have an astonishingly long life expectancy. Most of the 50 or so residents can be expected to live for at least 90 years. This island also has a pretty cool history. Back in 1789, British sailors actually rose up and had a mutiny, and they ended up settling on Pitcairn Island and on Tahiti all by themselves. The mutineers who settled on Tahiti were eventually arrested by the British, but the few who settled on Pitcairn were never apprehended. They were able to build their own community completely free of any government ruling. It was not until 1838 that the island finally became known as British territory, but that did not stop them from doing their own thing. Today you will find that all 50 of the residents are actually descendants of the original mutineers. This may sound pretty cool, but I'm betting after all these years there are probably some serious issues with the bloodlines. I don't want to make any accusations, but somebody may have married somebody's cousin. Oymyakon, Russia. If you thought some of the places that I already mentioned are cold, just try to visit Oymyakon in Russia. This is the coldest inhabited town on Earth, and it's one of the most remote and isolated communities ever. There are only around 500 people living here, and they brave some of the worst temperatures imaginable. On the coldest day, the temperature can dip to a staggering -90 degrees Fahrenheit, -68 Celsius. That's not only cold enough to freeze your mustache off, but it's cold enough to freeze your whole face off. The average temperature is -58 degrees Fahrenheit, -50 degrees Celsius, and that is not much better. In terms of isolation, the only way to get to this place by car is by driving for 2 straight days down a barren road. And don't even try it in the winter when the road is covered in snow and ice. You would probably never make it. Just looking at some of the images of this place in the winter, it literally looks like a frozen dystopia. Still, life is apparently pretty normal. The area has a school, a post office, and even a bank. Plus, there are lots of dogs. Oh yeah, and literally everything is covered in snow. It's a miracle that life continues to go on here. As a side note, if you want to see some of the coolest ice sculptures in the world, Oymyakon is the place to do it. An ice sculpture can last for months here without ever thawing. If you had to choose only one, which of these isolated towns would you visit? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. From the biggest shark ever caught to a mysterious beast accidentally hooked, here are 10 of the biggest catches that ever happened. Mako shark. One of the biggest sharks ever caught was ripped out of the ocean just recently in 2020 by a fisherman off the coast of Wales. This enormous Mako shark is believed to be around 11 feet long, 3.5 meters. The Mako is one of the fastest sharks in the ocean, and this one was caught only 35 miles, 55 kilometers from the coast. The man who caught it, named Rob Rennie, actually runs his own private charter boat. Rob spent 2 hours trying to get the creature into the vessel, but claimed it was actually too big, too powerful, and too heavy to get on board. There is video footage of him hooking the shark and dragging it alongside the boat, but Rob was forced to release the shark from the line and let it swim away. After 15 years of fishing, Rob told local news sources that the Mako shark was the biggest catch of his career. As a side note, the current record for the largest Mako shark ever caught using a fishing rod in UK waters is 500 pounds, 230 kilograms, but this dates back to 1971. Despite not being able to claim an official record because he never got the shark into the boat, Rob believes his shark could have weighed as much as 1,000 pounds. It was easily the size of a great white. Black marlin. An enormous black marlin was caught in 2018 that weighed 1,430 pounds. That is one big fish. As reported by ABC News, the fish was captured off the coast of Queensland, Australia, and it took a full 2 hours to catch. A little coincidental, the man who caught this giant black marlin is also named Rob, like the man who almost caught the Mako shark. However, there was a bit of an uproar after the fishermen brought this giant beast back on their boat. Because the giant marlin is so impressively large, people were calling the fishermen cruel for killing such a majestic animal, bringing back the debate about whether or not it's appropriate to be killing fish for fun. However, Rob and his team of sports fishermen claim that the enormous marlin actually died during the struggle, and that is why they brought it back to shore. They typically catch really large fish, tag them, then release them, but this one was a total accident and nothing cruel happened. The anglers estimated the fish to be around 15 years old. It's the largest marlin to be caught in Australian waters in over 30 years. Bluefin tuna. A lot of us eat our tuna from a can, and when we think of tuna, we usually think of a tiny little fish, but you might be surprised to know that bluefin tuna are actually huge. 3 teenage fishermen recently pulled in an enormous 700-pound bluefin tuna after a 7-hour struggle. The tuna was so powerful that it managed to drag the teenagers 10 miles before they could reel it in. According to CNN, they were about 40 miles off the coast of Portland when they finally did get the fish on board their boat, and they were only 17 years old. Apparently, they didn't even see the fish until 6 hours after the fight started. The tuna stayed below 300 feet, 90 meters of water, and did not want to go to the surface. They were very lucky that they managed to keep their energy and keep the fish on the line. It was so big that they could not get it in the boat, and other people had to come in their own boats to help the boys get the tuna back to shore. It was quite a good payday for the boys as well, as they sold the giant fish to a local fish processing company for a pretty reasonable $2,000. Have you ever gone fishing? Did you catch anything good? Did you let it go, or did you eat your catch? How big was it? Tell me about it in the comments below, and then remember to subscribe if you haven't already. There are more great videos coming out all the time, but you have to subscribe or you might miss them. Whale shark. In China, fishermen accidentally caught a giant whale shark that weighed over 2 tons. The fishermen never went looking for the whale shark, but one bit through their net, which was packed full of fish and ended up dying while trying to escape. So of course, they brought the whale shark up onto their boat. The shark measured 15 feet, 4.5 meters long, and was ridiculously huge. The fishermen apparently wanted to sell the giant shark, but it's actually illegal to catch or sell because it's an endangered species. Still, the carcass of a massive whale shark can be sold for somewhere around $30,000 according to National Geographic. This is in part because the population of whale sharks is extremely thin, with only a few thousand of them left. This makes them rare and very valuable if you can find the right buyer. The whale shark is indeed the biggest fish and the biggest shark in the world, and this is a rare catch that the fishermen probably won't be lucky enough to make again. What are they supposed to do with their catch? It's illegal to sell it because it's an endangered species, but letting it go to waste seems like a shame. Did they just let it rot? Just toss it back into the ocean to become food for the tiny marine organisms that feed off carcasses? The whole situation is pretty bizarre if you ask me. Goonch catfish. Anyone familiar with Jeremy Wade in his show River Monsters knows that this creature means business. Mr. Wade has caught some of the largest and strangest monsters that prowl the rivers of this world, and the biggest of them all is the Goonch catfish, which lives in the rivers of northern India and Nepal. Most Goonch catfish are actually caught by accident, and most are lost because they are so huge. The biggest one ever caught was 6.6 feet, 2 meters long, and weighed 230 pounds. It's not the biggest fish in the world, but it's definitely one of the biggest in any river. Jeremy ended up hooking one of these monster creatures in Nepal after investigating reports that men were being dragged into the water by a huge and ferocious fish. He had it on the line and fought with the animal, but the goonch eventually managed to break the line and escape. Even though Jeremy did not catch the giant fish he was hoping for, he has caught several small goonch catfish in the past when fishing in India, but none of them were over 161 pounds. It sounds like this one is going to go down in memory as the big one that got away. Mekong giant catfish. A fish believed to be the largest freshwater fish ever recorded was recently caught by a Thai fisherman. This happened back in 2005 when the fisherman reeled in a 646-pound catfish. It was a Mekong catfish, and it's considered to be one of the most threatened catfish species in the world because of habitat degradation. According to National Geographic, only around 11 fish were caught between 2001 and 2002. Then in 2003, fishermen only captured 6 giant catfish in Cambodia, all of which were released as part of a conservation project, but the catch in 2005 is definitely the biggest. The Mekong giant catfish was almost 9 feet long, 2.8 meters, and was the heaviest fish ever recorded since records began in Thailand back in 1981. Because the Mekong giant catfish is so huge and so rare, there is not much known about the ecology of the species. While at first the villagers had hoped to sell the fish to environmental groups, it died before it could be sold off, and so the catfish ended up being sold in pieces to the local villagers, and everyone had a good feast. Greenland shark. Believe it or not, after chasing giant catfish, Jeremy Wade actually left the rivers behind to hunt for the extremely elusive Greenland shark. And yes, he caught one. Jeremy had to travel to Norway to search for this ancient and mysterious sea monster. It took some time, but after reeling in about 50 miles, 75 kilometers of fishing line to check his baits, Jeremy hooked onto a shark. It was a huge struggle, but he did eventually reel in a 400-pound Greenland shark. These beasts usually live in extremely cold water about 2,000 feet below the surface. And being the guy that he is, Jeremy Wade actually put on a dry suit and got into the water with the shark. Later, Jeremy traveled to Greenland to catch an even larger Greenland shark. He ended up hooking one that weighed around 700 pounds and was estimated to be 200 years old. But unlike the first Greenland shark he saw off the coast of Norway, this one was mean. It had a seriously bad temper and acted more like a great white shark, and so Jeremy decided not to go swimming with it. In any case, this is one of the only records of a huge Greenland shark being captured. In case you were wondering, 200 years is not even that old for one of these sharks. They can live up to 500 years in the wild. Not only are they some of the biggest catches in the ocean, but they're some of the oldest. Not many animals can live longer than 500 years. Blue marlin. Another giant marlin was caught southwest of Portugal, but this was a blue marlin, and it happened on the last day of an angling adventure for a group of friends. The man who caught this enormous fish is a renowned angler from Georgia, and he was probably about halfway through catching it when he realized he had a marlin at the end of his line that weighed at least 800 pounds. Even before reeling it onto the boat, this guy knew he was dealing with a potential world record. It was a miracle that he managed to catch the thing using only light tackle. It was a 70-minute fight, but he did finally get the enormous marlin aboard. Once he did, it tipped the scales at an astounding 807 pounds. The International Game Fish Association has the current record at being 714 pounds, which was caught in 1990 on the Ivory Coast. Now it's just a waiting game as this dedicated fisherman waits to gain a world record. Swordfish. Just recently, a couple from Florida caught one of the biggest swordfish ever. According to the Tampa Bay Times, it took the couple 8 full hours to reel in the enormous swordfish. The monstrous beast actually dragged their boat a full 20 miles, 31 kilometers, before they finally won the fight. At the end of the day, the swordfish weighed 757 pounds, 350 kilograms, and this broke the previous Florida record, which had been set in 1978. It didn't only beat the record, it stomped the record. The previous largest swordfish was only 612 pounds, 278 kilograms. That means they beat the last record by over 100 pounds, 45 kilograms. However, the world record for the largest swordfish ever caught in history of the world happened in China back in 1953, and the swordfish weighed 1,182 pounds, 536 kilograms. This is according to the International Game Fish Association. Tiger shark. The last story on the list today also comes from Florida. According to Fox News, a single fisherman famous for wrangling sharks caught a giant tiger shark that he is claiming to be his biggest shark ever. The tiger shark that he caught was 13 feet long, 4 meters, and roughly 7 feet, 2.2 meters in girth. He hooked the shark in his boat and then reeled the thing in from the sand. Imagine standing on the beach and reeling in one of the biggest tiger sharks you ever have seen. The tiger shark is actually the second deadliest shark in the world, but the fisherman said he was never worried throughout the whole affair, even when the shark was looking at him while he struggled to get it unhooked and safely tagged. And in case you were wondering, no, the shark was not captured and eaten, it was tagged and released. This guy is a pro at catching sharks. He usually hooks them, tags them, takes a blood sample for research, and then lets them go. He actually works with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Apex Predator Tagging Program to promote the safe conservation of sharks. It's a heartwarming ending to a story that could have ended far more violently. What do you think about all these giant catches? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching and see you again soon. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for all the latest and greatest content.